I'd been a patrol officer for just over a year, and I was dispatched with another officer to go to an apartment complex in southwest Bakersfield. There was a female resident that hadn't been seen for a few days, so based on a phone call from a boyfriend, myself and another officer met the manager out front of the apartment, number 46. We went inside and walked through a living room, down a hallway, into a bedroom, and then we proceeded to the bathroom.
In the bathtub is the body of a woman. It quickly becomes obvious this is no death by natural causes.
She was face up. Her hands were bound behind her back with a piece of a telephone cord. She also had a brown pillowcase over her head and also had a piece of telephone cord wrapped around her neck.
The apartment manager tells Rourke that 18-year-old Dawn Koons lived in apartment 46.
As officers entered the apartment, it didn't look like there were a lot of signs of struggle or any disarray in a lot of the apartment, but in that bedroom, it looked like there had been a struggle.
Some of the sheets were pulled up, the blanket was pulled back, there was a pillow on the floor, and the phone cord had been removed from the wall. The phone was sitting on the ground next to the bed.
They didn't find anything that showed forcible entry. So the belief was maybe it was an acquaintance of hers, maybe it was a crime of passion.
Bakersfield police start interviewing Dawn's friends and associates.
They had to start pulling on threads and talking to folks and figuring out exactly why those things would or would not be important.
One of those threads is focusing on a note discovered on Dawn's door by the apartment manager.
Dawn, give me a call and let me know what you're up to. I can't seem to track you down. You're never home. Diane.
The investigators found that Dawn and Diane were pretty good friends. They worked together at Breakers and learned that Diane had been the last person to see Dawn before the weekend.
Investigators learned that she was last seen alive on Friday evening, January 12th, when her friend Diane dropped her off at her apartment. Diane watched her unlock the door, wave goodbye, and step inside. That was the last time she was seen alive. The next day, Diane tried to get a hold of Dawn, and she could not contact her. They had plans that day, and Dawn never showed up.
During Dawn's autopsy at the Kern County Coroner's Office, the coroner found that her cause of death was asphyxiation, and the kit that they submitted came back as positive for sexual assault.
Less than 24 hours after finding Dawn lifeless in her apartment bathtub, investigators bring Steve, the ex-boyfriend from Yonkers, in for questioning.
He said that he had been with friends that night. He went on to further describe the way that they broke up as he broke up with Dawn, that it was something that he had moved on from, and that he had gone camping that weekend.
Steve also tries pointing detectives in another direction.
Steve told investigators that he believed that another tenant at that apartment complex may be involved, that he had shown interest in Dawn.
So based on the information that Steve provided, the man in apartment 50, Prentice Foreman, investigators contacted Dawn's friends, even employees of the apartment complex, to determine whether or not Mr. Foreman was giving Dawn any sort of trouble or harassing her in any way. No one other than Steve had that information or could connect Mr. Foreman to Dawn in any way.
So without much else to go on, they focus on the neighbors Steve found so suspicious.
Prentice Foreman was a truck driver and was living in Bakersfield.
They talked to Mr. Foreman about where he was the weekend of Dawn's death, and Mr. Foreman claimed he was with his girlfriend, LaTanya, the entire weekend, that he did not know Dawn in any way other than maybe a neighborly hello once in a while at the mailboxes.
By the end of 1979, leads in the case have evaporated like morning dew in the hot California sun, and the case goes cold.
My brother, Leland, contacted a friend in law enforcement, and he contacted the Bakersfield police to resume the investigation.
The case itself really wasn't getting any attention up until the family called.
One of the first things they did was pull from their archives the police reports and tried to determine if there was any physical evidence that could be now used with recent DNA technology to try to solve the case. In their diligence, they learned that there was a rape kit taken at Dawn's autopsy in 1979, and that had been preserved and properly kept within the chain of custody. Investigators sent a large amount of evidence to the crime lab for possible DNA testing.
And then also the rape kit that had been seized as evidence as part of the autopsy. Unfortunately, what they learned was that we did not have a quality sample that had stood up through all of that time that gave us a sufficient quantity of testable substance.
2 years later, investigators are given new hope by a random discovery.
The Kern County Coroner's Office discovered some evidence related to many cases that had been in a storage facility that no one really knew about. And inside one of those boxes was a sample from Dawn's rape kit, 2 slides, which had been marked with Dawn's case number.
When the slides are brought to the crime lab for analysis, Bakersfield police are told they will finally have what they've been waiting for. After 36 years, there is enough sample to create a DNA profile of Dawn's killer for comparison. After months of waiting, results of the CODIS search finally come back.
There was a CODIS hit.
Initially, when we got this information, everybody was very excited. There was a little bit of surprise.
It was the man who lived in apartment 50, Prentice Foreman.
Prentice Foreman was interviewed by the detectives in 1979. And during that interview, he basically told the detectives that he had seen her in passing, would wave at her, maybe say hello to her, and he gave an alibi. He said he was with his girlfriend at the time. So I actually met with LaTanya at her residence, and she admitted to being a friend of Prentice. I gave her the time frame of the murder, January 12th, 1979, and she told me that she was not with Prentice during that time, that she was actually in Texas attending college.
The decision was made at that time to issue the arrest warrant and bring him in for a formal interview.
What kind of a relationship did you and Miss Koons have?
Friends.
When you say friends, I mean, explain that to me. What do you mean friends?
One sexual encounter.
When did that sexual encounter take place?
Months. Yes.
That was your sexual encounter months before?
Months back.
October?
3 months before then.
As soon as he said that, my partner and I basically kind of look at each other, and we knew right then and there he was done.
Within 48 hours of his arrest, Mr. Foreman was arraigned on a single count of first-degree murder. This defendant is the man in apartment 50. Dawn and Mr. Foreman knew each other in the sense that Dawn had seen him around the apartment complex before. She had expressed fear to Steve about the man who lived in apartment 50. He is the one who was harassing Dawn, giving her a hard time in the weeks leading up to her murder. She did have a habit of keeping her front door unlocked, and that's how I believe Mr. Foreman was able to get in. I believe Mr. Foreman entered the apartment and Dawn was already in her bedroom, either asleep or going to sleep. The attack definitely happened in the bedroom. The sheets were thrown about, the mattress was exposed, the lamp was knocked over, and the telephone cords were cut, all indicating that that is where the sexual assault and ultimately the murder happened.
After nearly 2 days of deliberation, the jury comes back with a verdict. Prentice Foreman is found guilty in one of Kern County's oldest unsolved homicides, the murder of Dawn Koons.
When they did read the verdict, I looked at Prentice, and he was obviously, I guess you could say, stunned and in disbelief. I honestly don't know if he really understood what just happened. It was almost like he was dazed.
On July 10th, 2019, a judge sentences Foreman to 25 years to life in prison.
Dawn was definitely unique and special. I'm still grief-stricken that my sister was taken from me, that I've been denied the opportunity to see her develop, to succeed, to see what her life would have become. Those things are still missing for me.